Hi, I'm only 24, yet I caught myself saying, I'm too old for this, while listening to Nina Girachi's new album, I Love My Computer. I love the record, yet me, who is closer to 20 than 30, somehow felt too old for this album, which is absurd. For one, I grew up listening to Skrillex and his label mates in Oslo, and secondly, Nina Girachi is literally older than me, and yet I feel the way I do for incredibly stupid reasons. Which is why I'm fascinated by Danny Brown. At the age of 44, he has reinvented himself in a fashion which would catch many off guard. His embrace of the newer generation of experimental pop and electronic is fascinating, not only because he's the first rapper to adopt these sounds, but it's coming from a completely unexpected figure, or maybe not all too unexpected. This is why you're never too old for new music. It's not a universal fact, but it can feel as if many musicians stick to their guns as they get older. It's rare to find musicians who not only are willing to completely shake up and embrace new sounds, but even assimilate into a new generation of artists. The example which pops into my head is Miles Davis. In the late 60s, when he embarked into his electronic period, he was well into his 40s. But joined with a who's who of jazz rock pioneers such as John McLaughlin, Chick Corea, and Herbie Hancock, he transformed himself. Synthesizers, tape loops, rock and funk instrumentations were here. In a silent way, marked a new leg of his career, which saw his music become more ambitious. Songs became longer and more improvisation heavy. He walked away from jazz's old traditions and embraced the new burgeoning world of rock, funk, and R&B. But in lifestyle too, there was a change. Gone were the well-dressed cats in suits performing in smoky jazz lounges, in were the afros, flared pants with psychedelia colors, and switching from a boring brass trumpet to one that was mirror shine red with gold accents. It was a reinvention in the truest sense of the word, not just in music, but in outlook and lifestyle too. Well, in the case of Miles Davis, it's hard to say if the change did him any good as he struggled with severe alcohol and drug abuse during this period. Much of his contemporaries didn't embrace this new approach to jazz as openly, many either sticking to their hard bop roots or moving towards free improvisation. But none spoke to the newer generation quite like Davis. In the 50s and 60s, it was clear jazz was for nerds. There was young folk obsessing over jazz, but never in the same way as rock. When his electric period was in full swing, he was playing on the biggest stages a jazz musician could dream of, billing concerts with Neil Young's Crazy Horse and Steve Miller. He may have alienated the old guard, but spoke the language of an entirely new generation, which is why I feel both impressed but also sad by Miles Davis and Danny Brown's switch up. It's incredible to hear musicians in their prime make a drastic reinvention, but depressing to see how many an older listener may completely reject this direction, all because they embraced young music and they're too old for it. Really? Are you ever too old for new music? Obviously not. Timothy McHenry wrote an incredible essay for The Conversation where he explores why, as we get older, we explore new music less. As you can imagine, the reasoning can get quite complicated. For one, there is a genuine fall-off to people discovering new music as we get older. Referencing a 2017 study, it shows that in childhood and adolescence, we are more comfortable discovering unfamiliar music. Even in young adulthood, we still have a desire to discover new music, however, it isn't as intense as our teenage years. And as we get older, it really starts falling off. This is also compounded by the fact that as we grow old, we put less significance on music in our lives. When we are young, music is one of the main markers of social circles. What artists and genres you listen to can determine the crowd you ultimately hang out with. When I was young, listening to EDM meant you were cool, or at least wanted to be cool but was actually the cringiest human alive, totally not personal experience. Listening to anime music and nightcore remixes meant you were a fucking nerd, but at least you had your own clique. Or if you were like me, listening to Death Grips, you probably didn't have friends. However, that's what it's like being a kid. As an adult, there's more to who you are than your taste in music. You have work, familial obligations, and friends who's already established in your life. There's just less pressure to seek out new music to fit in with a social circle. But it doesn't have to be this way. In Daniel J. Levitin's book, This Is Your Brain on Music, he compares people seeking out new music to Noam Chomsky's theory of humans having an innate desire to learn languages. As he explains, There is something inherent in humans wanting to learn any of the world's music, the same way we humans will invent a language to communicate with each other no matter the circumstances. Whatever language or music we are exposed to while growing up, we will naturally pick it up. In the case of languages, it's the ability to speak English or Spanish, for example, or in the case of music, it's forming your taste. This is because during our upbringing, new neural connections are constantly forming, and whatever information we're introduced to becomes natural to us. As Levitin says, during this stage of our lives, any music we listen to is incorporated into the very wiring of our brains. The reason why music felt so good when we were young was because we quite literally were growing brain cells while listening to it. And when we are well past the growing stage, new music can feel alienating because of the difference. Because so many people haven't kept up with exploring new music after they've grown up, the only point of reference for the euphoria of finding a new song was when your brain was still developing. As you can imagine, that feeling from when you were younger was no doubt more intense and memorable, be it because of biological reasons, but also life reasons such as less responsibilities and stress. But fundamentally, the same neural connections and chemicals we produced when experiencing joy at finding a new song is still generated even as a grown adult. The only difference is our brain has grown up. So if you'd like to know why so many people feel nostalgic and can't seem to move away from the past, that's why. Danny Brown's Stardust is an album about healing, contemplating your past, and moving on to a brighter chapter of your life. At the age of 44, this record is the first made while he was completely sober. After decades of problems with drugs and alcohol, he announced in June 2023 he was 90 days sober after checking himself into a rehab clinic. Later in October, he released Quaranta. All his albums preceding it felt like one downward spiral after another, well aware of the consequences but feeling completely unable to wake up from the nightmare. In Quaranta, Brown reflects. It's a record realizing you're at rock bottom. Filled with introspection and contemplation, it's the ultimate hangover after decades of inebriated stupors, one where you realize you have to quit it before it kills you. Stardust is a record which sounds like a new lease on life, one which has you both contemplating your past, but also looking forward to better things. A prideful chest pump of an album which brags about being a healthier human. Perhaps it's why Brown made such a drastic shift in sound and collaborators. Gone were the traditional sounds of hip-hop he had worked with all his life, and in were instrumentals filled with youthful hyperpop, EDM, and psychedelic pop. In his book, Levitin writes extensively about the neurological effects which music has on us. There's a lot, and I mean a lot, of technical jargon across the book, but one thing he makes apparent is that music hits at a primal part of our brain. Music hits the same receptors in our brain as language does, but as he points out, it affects the part of our brain dealing in emotions in a way which is stronger than mere language. As he says, our brain takes immense satisfaction in matching a real-world beat to our mental beat. That's why we shake our leg to the tune of a song. In fact, music strikes the same parts of our brain which has to do with timing. But whereas an earthquake hitting our home messing up our internal tempo would cause us to panic, music doesn't. Rather, it activates the internal reactions just as powerful as panic, but in a pleasurable manner, one which leaves you feeling every single emotion on the spectrum. As you can imagine, this feeling would only be enhanced in the developmental stages of our lives. And when combined with listening to new music during this pivotal moment in our life, it's no wonder why it's these moments which sticks in our minds the most. In Nina Geraci's I Love My Computer, the song iPod Touch perfectly encapsulates this feeling. A song you hear randomly on the internet as a kid, which, little did you know, would change your life forever. One which burrows itself deep into the very lore of you as a person. One which defined the time period you discovered it in. As she describes it perfectly across the track, it's never about how the song sounds, but it's always about the memories it preserved, and in the process will forever only belong to you. This feeling may feel fleeting, as if it could only happen when we were younger, but that's just not true. As McHenry says in his essay, despite research saying those past young adulthood generally stop exploring more music and are less open ear to it, it's nothing biological. Rather, the mere reason we don't explore music is because we have other priorities in life. There's no real reason why we as grown adults can't experience that same euphoria of listening to a new song and have it become a core memory. As McHenry sums up in his essay, what we think of taste is simply a dopamine reaction arising from our patterns our brain recognizes, which create the expectation of pleasure based on pleasures past. When we stop actively listening to new or unfamiliar music, the link between musical pattern and pleasure is severed. Essentially, the idea that our brain will never be able to hear music the way we did when we were young is false. Yeah, our brain chemistry may have been different when we were younger, but fundamentally that pleasure you felt hearing the synths of Common People by Pulp for the first time can very much be replicated. All you need to do is be a little adventurous and open-minded, and you'll find a whole new world. This is why I love Danny Brown's approach in Stardust. For one, it's extremely bold for a man well into his 40s to pull off such a rebirth 6 albums in. It also shows an open-mindedness to music which is rarely seen from his generation. It might not be true, but this rebirth in sound is, I think, indicative of his own life journey. Why stick with the murky sounds he has been reveling in for so many years when there are all these bright and exciting hyperpop producers around ready to make their mark on the world? When you're moving into a better stage of your life, who wouldn't want to feel that same euphoria from when you're young and discovering a new song that will change your life? I remember when I was in my mom's car on the way to an after-school prep class when I heard the opening to Get Got by Death Grips. It was unlike anything I had ever heard before. The way MC Ride's oddly calm rapping gently came over the skittering drums, and suddenly a synth melody coming straight from a Middle Eastern ringtone pack crashes right in the middle of the song. My eyes were open to an entire world of music, one which was brasher, louder, and felt like one big middle finger. This is the type of euphoria that can quite literally change your life, and it's a feeling I want to be able to experience even if I'm in my 40s. I don't know if this is what Danny Brown actually felt, but I wouldn't be too surprised if this shift in sound was the result of changing his life in a drastic way, or at least soundtrack this new part of his life with the sounds of Underscores and Jane Remover, and the only way he could have done it is by being open to new music. Nobody is too old for new music, because if you're a little bit more adventurous in your life, you may feel that old feeling all over again. And that's that. Thanks everyone for watching. If you enjoyed the video, do leave a like and subscribe. Or don't, I can't force you. If you want to support the channel, I have a Ko-fi page where you can donate. And I have a second channel where I upload music mixes, so if you want to hear what I've been listening to, you can subscribe to it. I also have an Instagram and Twitter, so if you want to keep up with whatever I'm doing, you can follow me there. So yeah, I'll see you all around.